There's no resources out there. There weren't a lot of trails. To the popular areas there were, the Elk River Trail, Flower Ridge, Della Falls. But to get into the heart of the island, it was remote. You've got to be prepared for bushwhacking. You know, the island's climbing community's fairly small, and the mountains here weren't very well known. There weren't many people out there, which is what I liked at that time. I felt like I was contributing to the history of mountaineering on Vancouver Island by recording it for future generations. I'm originally from Australia. At a very young age, moved to Christchurch, New Zealand, where I grew up. I've always had an interest in history. Even back in New Zealand, I would read all the old climbing books. Even back then, I had an inkling to write a book, something to do with mountaineering. I travelled the world and ended up in Seattle. I have a friend in Victoria who I'd met on a previous trip in South America. Seattle's just a ferry ride across to Victoria. I'll go across, visit them. We went around to someone's place for dinner one night and they said, oh, you should phone Strathcona Park Lodge. They're always wanting mountaineering instructors. One thing led to another and still here. Strathcona Park Lodge had a pretty good library. I started reading through their books. I found some inaccuracies. I'd read something and then another book and didn't match. And so I started going down to Victoria to the archives, looking through stuff there. Older climbers, getting their stories. And over the years I just accumulated all this knowledge, and then one day someone said, why don't you write a book? When the Europeans inspected Victoria Harbour to build a new fort for the Hudson's Bay Company, they would have gone up to the top of some of the peaks. They'd have gone up to those summits to get a look down onto the terrain. I think the climbing first started right back in those early days. Forts appeared in Nanaimo, Port Hardy at Fort Rupert. Some of the early explorers crossed the island on First Nations trails, like the Oolakan Trail between Wass Lake and Tassis. They travelled between Cowichan over to Nitnat area. But there still wasn't a comprehensive exploration of the interior. In 1894, Reverend William Bolton organised an exploratory trip to travel the whole length of Vancouver Island by foot and canoe. Starting at the very top end of the island and finishing down in Souk. That first summer they had a lot of bad weather when they were travelling the north end of the island, and they got held up, so they didn't complete the whole journey. He wrote comprehensive diaries of his trips, and he returned in 1896 and completed that middle section of the island. From Gold River they went down Muchla Inlet, up the Burman River, up to Burman Lake, and then that's where he saw the Behind and the Golden Hind. He then continued over into the Wolf River, down to Buttle Lake. They sailed down Buttle Lake, up Flower Ridge, and then dropped over Margaret Creek down into Great Central Lake and to Port Alberni, and finished the first traverse of the island. It was a pretty incredible journey. They have got that trail now, the Vancouver Island Trail, that's trying to emulate that trip, but journey, but it's got a long way to go yet. When Strathcona Park was designated in 1911, then they had to start surveying the park. So 1912, 13, 14, you had the surveyors come into the park. But there was one group, W.W. Urquhart was a surveyor, W.R. Kent was a photographer. They spent 2 summers travelling through the interior of the park. You've got to remember, there was no trails then, no maps, and they were producing those maps which we today use for climbing. Vancouver Island section of the Alpine Club was formed in 1911, 1912. The club formed in Victoria. Because there weren't the roads up island, they spent a lot of time in the Souk Hills. Up island here, you had the Comox District Mountaineering Club, which was formed in 1928. They were exploring into the mountains here. The Alpine Club and the CDMC joined forces for several trips. That early exploration of the Paradise Meadows, Cliff, Comox Glacier, all that area was a joint venture by the CDMC and the Alpine Club of Canada. Money was tight back then, so a lot of climbers couldn't leave the island to go climbing in the interior. They sought out the peaks on the island here. Early prospectors covered a lot of ground. In some areas they built cabins which in the 50s and 60s climbers would use to get to some of the peaks. Like the loggers, the miners and early prospectors have influenced mountaineering for us today. The surveyors were out there in the 30s climbing a lot, but they didn't write reports. It's the Alpine Club members or the climbers on the island who wrote the reports, which is what I read, and it sparked my interest. It was interesting when I started writing Beyond Nootka. Sid Watts, he was known as the guy who knew Vancouver Island. He was a little reticent about it because he thought, we've got a well-kept secret here. We don't want an influx from the mainland or from overseas coming here. My feeling was I wanted to make islanders aware of what they had in their backyard. By producing my book Beyond Nootka, I was making them aware of what they had in their backyard and also making them think about issues with logging companies right on the border of the parks. Local people would see this book and go, hey, we've got something special out there. Let's stop them from encroaching into the park. In the late 1970s, 1980s, Vancouver Island section of the Alpine Club, the numbers were growing, and so they started having scheduled trips, and to encourage people to come out on trips, they'd get the leaders to write reports. It went through several different names, eventually voted on Island Bushwhacker. People, they want things to read. There was no internet, you've got to remember, back in those days, so this is where you got information from. Over the years, through various editors and publishing techniques, the magazine has become a collector's item. Teaching mountaineering at Strathcona Park Lodge, I got to know Strathcona Park really well. Once I finished that teaching the mountaineering, that gave me time to go and do all these other remote peaks in the park, which has just been fantastic. Places that I feel like no one's ever been to before. Not necessarily on the summit, but just some of those valleys, walking up a river somewhere, and just getting that sense no one's been here before, no one's seen this before. It's a special feeling. I feel very comfortable in the mountains. Traveling through the bush, it's second nature to me. When I was teaching the mountaineering, people would ask me, they'd look up somewhere and they'd go, how do you know which way to go? I couldn't actually give an answer as to why I chose to go one way or the other. Experience had taught me to go, I'm going to go that way. I feel like the rocks or the trees are telling me to go that way. There's nothing logical about it. It's becoming a feeling. I was with a group, we had gone into the Comox Glacier, we were coming out and there was a rock pitch there which we had to use the rope on. And I'm sitting at the top letting the students belay each other up, and I look over onto the ridge, a valley over, and there's all this snow and avalanche slopes. There's one path from the bottom of the valley to the top of the ridge that's not affected by avalanches. And travelling up this snow slope was a bear. I'm thinking, how does the bear know that that's the safest route? It doesn't go to Avalanche 101 classes. It's something that's passed down. You learn to think like an animal when you're out there. A lot of time spent in the mountains, the more comfortable you become.